Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very special edition of the Four Lads podcast. This is our latest book club episode, and our guest today is a man whose voice will certainly need no introduction to every Rangers living room, but I don't know how many folk have actually seen the face. So, Tom Miller of Rangers Television, welcome.
And thank you for the invitation, David. If they've not seen the face, well, I've just been instantly put off, haven't they? Today's the first time.
Well, I always say I've got a face for radio as well, so not to worry.
A pleasure to have your company.
Fantastic. So, Tom has recently brought out a publication which I'm looking forward to reading, which was called The Significance of Souness, which charts the Rangers' career and the career beyond Rangers of one of our legendary figures of the past. But I'm just going to ask Tom to start with. Your last book was on the triumph in Barcelona, the club's greatest ever triumph. What made you pick Mr. Souness as your next subject?
Well, to be candid, 1 year ago next week, David, I was on holiday in Mallorca, and I read David Holmes's recollection, his book about those halcyon days, about him coming into the club to be given free hand to take it forward in what were pretty dark times at Rangers in those early 80s. Lawrence Marlborough positioned David Holmes to make it more business-like first and foremost. And his vision was to go and replace Jock Wallace, who was then manager for the second time round. So I found it a really fascinating read from David Holmes. And at the end of it, while lying poolside, not a pretty sight, in Mallorca, the title came to me, just how significant Souness was, not just for Rangers, but for the whole of Scottish football. And this resonated with me, the significance of Souness. So much so, it played about in my mind for the remainder of the holiday and when we came home. And I thought it would be a worthwhile project to roll back the years, 40 years this week, as we speak, in the first week in April. Graham Souness was confirmed to be the next Rangers manager. So I felt it would be worthy of recalling the 40-year anniversary, as would be, of Graham Souness coming to Rangers. And my take on it was that very fortunate to have relations with a number of former players, particularly of that era. And I thought it would be certainly pertinent and prudent to get their memories of the period and what it was like to work under Souness, and then reflect on the achievement 40 years down the line. So that was the inspiration originally. And I felt we hadn't made enough of winning that title under Souness. And you think back to the first day of the league campaign, red carded for the challenge in George McCluskey, ending the campaign with a red card at Pittodrie, Celtic going down to Falkirk at home, and a draw at Pittodrie was enough for Rangers to win the league after such a barren spell of top trophies. So I wanted to make the splash at the start of the book about, mission accomplished, and then roll back to how the scenario had been set up and how it unfolded, and how you then laid a platform for such a successful period, including the magnificent 9 in a row, and then a wee bit of the cameo thereafter about the significant marks he made in the Scottish game, and then what he did after Rangers. So I bookended it with the early part of his career, with some great tales from his former teammate Steve Perryman in the Tottenham youth ranks, right through to the end up when even Barry Ferguson played under him at Blackburn, gave us a memory or two as well, which harmonised with his brother Derek's time playing under Graham Souness at Ibrox. So that was the kind of inspiration and the flow I had in my mind for it, and hopefully it's been well received. I think I've just had there was a tight time scale. As you know, these things aren't easy to hit deadlines, but that was the inspiration, was April, and I was asked to finish it by the end of August by the publisher. So it was eat, sleep, breathe Graham Souness. There wasn't much else left on the horizon 24/7, but Graham Souness to meet the deadline, which allowed the book to hit the shelves in the shops and Amazon and other booksellers, of course, online prior to the Christmas markets. So I'm pleased with the outcome, and it evoked so many wonderful memories, David.
Yeah, well, as I said to you earlier on before we started, I didn't have time to get it in a paper copy, so I've joined the 21st century for one of the first times ever, and bought it on ebook. So, obviously, the picture in front, Souness at his peak when we were winning championships and stuff like that. But maybe for folk younger than us, can you put into context just what state Rangers were in before he arrived? And what do you remember about the day he was appointed? Because it's one of those JFK days for me.
Absolutely, 100%. Couldn't agree more. Rangers were in the doldrums. Crowds were down to around 8,000 or 9,000. More regularly, maybe 12,000 would be a crowd worthy of note at that time. Jock Wallace had come back in for a second spell. Our transfer activity was hardly the most exciting, and with no disrespect to guys like Cammy Fraser and Ian Ferguson, the original Ian Ferguson, both of whom came from Dundee with 175,000, 250,000 pounds. And I think David Holmes himself made reference to Rangers being run more like a bowling club than a professional business. So David Holmes came in and swept into power, upset a lot of people en route, including directors who were in position when he came in. But he had carte blanche from Lawrence Marlborough, who lived in Nevada, was the grandson of former chairman John Lawrence. And it was John Lawrence, the building group, who had invested heavily in Rangers in the early 60s. And John Lawrence, under his tenure, Rangers had terrific success. As he grew older, he passed the reins to his grandson, Lawrence Marlborough, and despite being resident in Nevada, stateside, he took an active interest in what was happening at Rangers, but was frustrated that we were in the shadows of Celtic, was frustrated that financially it wasn't really even washing its face. There were no board meetings with structure where there was plans put in place, where they had a short-term, medium and long-term goals for the club, both on and off the park. The stadium had been redeveloped prior to that under Willie Waddell's stewardship. So the infrastructure was almost right. It needed someone with drive and a vision and commitment to take it forward. And David, I don't think there was anyone more committed until Souness came in than David Holmes himself, who had been a director of the John Lawrence Building Group. When he came to Rangers and given the keys of the castle, he was at his desk at 5 a.m. and would be there regularly through until 11 at night as he totally re-energised Rangers Football Club, top to bottom. His first vision was to bring in box office manager. He had only one target, and that was Graham Souness, who at that time was playing in Sampdoria in Italy after such a huge success at Liverpool. He went to Italy, and he himself admitted it fully changed his outlook on life and football. The way he had to live his life there in Italy probably extended his career by a few years along the way as well. But he was settled in Italy, loved the lifestyle, and was doorstepped by David Holmes. Literally jumped on a plane, went to Italy, knocked the door and said, "I want you to be the next manager of Rangers." Graham Souness was 33 years of age at the time, was about to embark, funnily enough, on a World Cup mission with Scotland in the US, which is about to be replicated again 40 years on. And Graham Souness, while cautious in the first instance, was absolutely smitten with the concept of being a player manager of a club like Rangers. Now, an Edinburgh boy as he was, and went to Tottenham as a 16, 17-year-old, he always had a bit of an affinity for Hearts, but he also used to come to Ibrox on European nights as a schoolboy, brought across by his grandfather, I think, and an uncle at that time. So he always had this affinity to Rangers. There was also a bit of the Edinburgh coming out on where his local club was Hearts. So it wasn't two bad clubs to be taking an interest in, but immediately the offer was made. He didn't grasp it with both hands. He gave a positive indication that it was something he'd be willing to embrace. However, having slept on it, he then immediately went back to David Holmes and said, let's make this work. Now, because we were heading into a World Cup, Jim White, who was then the renowned radio broadcaster as he is now, former presenter on Sky, at that time would have been with STV, going back to the Scott Sport days.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Jim had been, working towards the World Cup and been doing some features. And one of the features had been about Graham Souness in Sampdoria. And he'd built up a wee bit of a relationship with the kit man at Sampdoria. And the kit man at Sampdoria contacted Jim White and said, by the way, we're losing our iconic midfielder to Scotland. And Jim White said, yeah, and we know he's going to America with Scotland. Graham Souness is the captain of Scotland. He said, no, we're losing him to Glasgow Rangers. And what a scoop that was then for Jim White. But what it meant then was when Jim, like all good journalists will do, try to make the story stand up and verify that it was facts, he made his contacts to Ibrox to determine if this was true or not. Rangers were then a bit hesitant to give credence to the tale. But what Jim White was cute enough to say was, well, I'm going to go with it. Anyway, that accelerated Rangers' announcement that Graham Souness would be the next manager. Rangers were out the Scottish Cup at the semi-final stage. History repeats itself again.
They knocked out the Hearts in the first round that year, didn't they?
Yeah.
I remember I was at Tynecastle. I remember they could beat 3-2.
I remember it well, yes, but this was the stage of the season. Semi-finals. Yeah. So with a vacant weekend, they hastily arranged a friendly at Ibrox with Tottenham Hotspur. The crowd was disappointing, and Rangers lost 2-0. A Sunday fixture on the weekend, as I say, of the Scottish Cup semi-finals, where Rangers' hopes for lifting that particular piece of silverware were long gone anyway. The next day, David Holmes met Jock Wallace in the car park of Strathclyde Park, just off the M74, and relieved him of his duties. And immediately, he then was on the front foot to make the Graham Souness imaginative appointment they had a reality. In the interim, he left Alec Totten in charge, and Alec had been assistant to Jock Wallace, and the plan had been succession originally, that when Jock Wallace moved on, Alec Totten would succeed him, very much like the Liverpool boot room kind of culture. Alec Totten, terrific man he is, never got that opportunity. But I have to say, with hindsight, while originally perhaps feeling a bit of sympathy for Alec Totten, with hindsight, positioning Graham Souness there took the club to a whole new level. And within a year, you couldn't get a season ticket for love nor money. So that was how the appointment kind of came about at that time. And I think it was, as you say, a JFK moment almost for everyone, that we'd gone from this mediocrity in the domestic game to the potential that Graham Souness could deliver. Captain of Scotland, still a sensational footballer in his own right, and he picked up every piece of silverware possible in his time as captain of Liverpool as well. So if I'm being honest, I don't quite remember actually when I was first told, but I do remember being absolutely blown away with excitement of this potential. And none of us were left disappointed when things started to take shape.
Absolutely. So we'll go into some of the players he signed shortly, but obviously that first summer with Chris Woods and Terry Butcher was made all the headlines. But I was going to ask, the significance of Souness wasn't just as the manager, if you like. He was such an important player as well. And I think that's maybe forgotten because he brought all these big name players to Rangers. But how important do you think he was actually as a player on the park that first season?
David, Graham Souness was as big as any of his signings from a footballing perspective when he pulled the boots on. But he also knew he had to extend his career by limiting his appearances along the way. But you can think of some games, even in Europe, when it wasn't quite going to plan, Graham Souness would do something to spark a reaction, either from his players or from the fans. And that would lift the whole stadium. It might have been a crunching challenge on Siggy Johnson, taking him out from the knee or whatever thereafter. But if he felt that's what was needed, that's what was needed. He had an arrogance, a controlled arrogance. Remember one other European night, he popped the ball back to Chris Woods from the halfway line. Back to the goalkeeper. And that was a puffed out chest moment to say, we're Rangers, we fear no one, we will do it our way. So he coined the phrase, of course, no one likes us, we don't care. Of course he cared, but it was never going to let that be public knowledge. So on the field, he was a leader of men, and he signed those of his same vision and in the same ilk as himself. That first signing, of course, was Colin West from Sunderland. Yeah. Someone who would be a focal point of the attack, a physical presence for Alan McCoist. It was only a case of timing that he came through the door first. But the next two signings, significant again, were the two that were always top of his radar, and that was England captain Terry Butcher and England goalkeeper Chris Woods. And the tale about signing Terry Butcher is sensational, who was on everyone's radar coming out of his time at Ipswich, needing the money. They had constructed a new grandstand. The only way they could foot the bill for the construction work was to sell their iconic captain. Manchester United wanted him, Tottenham wanted him, but it was Graham Souness who got the deal done. Effectively hijacked him when he came back from America and his plane landed at Heathrow. Souness hunted him down, using the term of Danny Rule there for a moment. Souness hunted him down, found him in his hotel, wouldn't let him leave until he got on another flight to Glasgow, smuggled him in the back door at Ibrox, gave him the tour of Rangers, and refused to let him go until he put pen to paper. And that, again, shows you the determination that Graham Souness had, the desire to turn things around and turn them around quickly. And I think that signing of Terry Butcher meant that Graham Souness had a leader on the pitch, and it allowed him then to build a team effectively almost round about him. Chris Woods was next to come through the door. Another, visionary signing as a goalkeeper. You could start to see that the spine of the team was the key thereafter. But, Graham Souness sold the vision of Rangers Football Club to every big name signing. Didn't matter where they were playing, what they'd achieved in their career. To have to come into Rangers, there's not many left Rangers saying they'd been disappointed in what they had enjoyed in their time at Ibrox. And so many of them, even today, look back and say it wasn't, it was a privilege to play for the club. They might only have been there when that old door that was rotating regularly at the front outside Ibrox, some players came, embraced, did well and moved on. If they didn't, Graham Souness was absolutely ruthless about, making things happen. If you didn't deliver what was expected in such a short period, you were moved on and someone else had the gig. Maurice Johnson was probably the biggest signing. He pulled the pin out the grenade on that one, did he not just to smuggle him into the club while everyone thought he was going back to Celtic Park, but Maurice Johnson himself, the way he embraced the job was sensational, and something we should be grateful for. That, gone are the days, when players didn't celebrate scoring against their old teams. My goodness, Maurice Johnson loves scoring against Celtic, and he scored some important goals against Celtic. And again, that was it. The traditional rules on transfers were ripped up, put in the bin by Graham Souness. He was a man on a mission, and he delivered.
Oh, without doubt. So, if I go back to the start of his first season, you talked about the sending off in the first day of the defeat at Easter Road. We actually didn't start the season all that well. We remember we lost it in United, we lost at Dens Park. We were quite a bit behind Celtic in the first few months of the season. Something that always annoys me as an older Rangers fan is how the League Cup gets dismissed a lot by younger supporters as not a very important trophy. I always think the first trophy of the season is absolutely enormously important. How important do you think it was to win that first trophy in the League Cup final against Celtic?
It didn't just give the players a flavour of success. It reignited the fans.
Yeah.
And they loved every moment of it. You're right about the League Cup. In those days, it would be played to finish by end of October, quite often. So it gave you an opportunity to build upon that success. You were able to send a message out to all your opponents at that time that, Rangers were very much targeting every trophy on the domestic front. Now, the League Cup had been won successfully twice by Jock Wallace, so it wasn't as if it was something totally alien for Rangers to go and win under Souness. But the first one, probably, David, as you've identified, the most important. It brought, structure. It brought a reminder that, this may have been the third prize domestically in the Scottish game, but it was only a stepping stone to the next phase. And it also probably allowed Rangers to get that, because it was an early trophy in the season. It allowed them to park the previous frustrations of draws and defeats when it hadn't come quite as quickly as he would have liked. But at that time, he was still shaping not just a team, he was shaping a squad. And we'd made Europe by the skin of our teeth that first season under Graham Souness, having to win we'd lost at Clydebank in the run-in, and I think it was a win against Motherwell. It was enough just to get us into 5th place in the league to qualify for Europe. So if you take that as the starting point, 5th domestically in the league, to winning the league in that first season, yes, there was an absolute king's ransom laid out by way of transfer fees, but it was recouped through the gate. If you look back then, the numbers who attended, I think the one I used for analysis in the book was a fixture against Motherwell, against the same fixture 12 months before, and the difference in crowds from 40,000 plus from 8,000, and the revenue that generated. My goodness, all of a sudden you had the greenbacks there, pardon the term, which were funding the inbound transfers of these global players who were recognised at international level almost everywhere. It was just terrific times. And once we got a bit of wind in our sails, the arrogance came through. Souness with that chest puffed out in midfield, he had not say problems, that would be unkind to use the word problems, but he had the youth factor of Durrant, McCoist and Ferguson, Derek that is, to deal with. And he knew they were all terrific talents, but he had to find a way to harness that talent with a lifestyle that gave them, every chance of winning matches come a Saturday. And that was, all about avoiding kebab shops on a Thursday night or whatever they're after. So, as a young man growing up as a manager, he had a lot to contend with, Graham Souness. He trusted players, and if he didn't trust you, you weren't there. That was the bottom line. He also gave some youngsters a chance along the way as well, which is often forgotten about. Dave McPherson, Scott Nesbitt, albeit there had been a bit of a fallout along the way with Scott Nesbitt, who was perhaps arguably a victim of his own versatility. Was he a striker? Was he a centre half? Was he a defender? Was he a midfielder? He embraced it all at every opportunity.
I think one of the players probably it's not forgotten, but maybe not talked about that first season was Robert Fleck. Robert Fleck scored a lot of goals in that season. Remember, Colin West got injured and Fleck came into the team. Yeah. The likes of him and Durrant, as you say, Derek Ferguson, Stuart Monroe, there was
David
lots of homegrown players in there.
He just got something extra out them, David, as well. Yeah. And then David Cooper,
of course,
who we all knew probably the biggest talent in the Scottish game at that time, who on occasion would drift in and out of games under Jock Wallace. Souness said, you're the provider for my team. Just get on the ball, do what you do, and play these cutting passes and deliveries that strikers thrive on. As you say, stepping up to the plate was Flecky, and he scored all sorts of goals. His movement was terrific. And it's hard to imagine then that even Golden Cojones McCoist, his goal scoring prowess was being eclipsed by Flecky. So yes, then obviously the new signings came in, but very few of them didn't hit the ground running. Souness knew what he wanted, and he knew how to get the best out of them. And you think back to the Christmas present first season, Graham Roberts coming up from Tottenham, his debut against Dundee United, ran the length of Ibrox. Goal-bound effort blocked by Billy Thompson, the former Rangers goalkeeper as well. There was McCoist one hand to pop it in on a particularly heavy winter's day. And that was probably when Rangers realised this is going to be our title. And they had ways of winning under Souness. The other side of that coin, of course, is the way it ended for Graham Roberts, who was a real fan's favourite, and described by David Holmes as chairman as a Christmas present to the fans. Eventually, when he performed to a level that Graham Souness wasn't comfortable with, he was put down the road and sold on to Chelsea. So there was this, it didn't matter who you were under Graham Souness, it was all about Rangers, first and foremost. It wasn't selfish, it wasn't about what he did. He only made decisions which undoubtedly he believed were best for the club.
Yeah. So I must admit, that first season under Souness is one of my favourite seasons, following Rangers home and away. I've got so many great memories, the Cooper reverse pass to Durant, the goal against Deal Tampere, the cup final, the New Year game when Souness was absolutely incredible. But as you say earlier on, it all sort of came to its climax at Pittodrie when we finally brought the championship back home after 9 long years. What do you remember about that day?
Well, there's a couple of 3 things in particular, probably, David. One is the goal, where we have a free kick and David Cooper's over the ball. And if you see the footage now, even on YouTube, Terry Butcher gets a message to him where he wants it. And Cooper understood immediately what was required. Play it into an area. And it was if it was Rapier-like. It was on radar, delivered to the head of Terry Butcher, who poured the header into the net at what would have been the Aberdeen end. They laid both ends effectively. And yet, as the ball hit the net, there was a sea of red, white and blue, where all these undercover Rangers fans had positioned themselves behind the goal with the Aberdeen fans. And then, of course, they got into the pitch as well to celebrate. So that's one thing, is the Cooper delivery, the Butcher header, the Rangers fans celebrating despite being infiltrating the Aberdeen end. And the next part is probably the end of the game, when joy just overtook every other emotion, and the Rangers fans got onto the pitch to try and celebrate with the players. And as the players tried to head to the confines of the Pittodrie dressing room, which are down in the corner, as you know, they had quite a distance to cover to get there, and very few of them made it with much by way of memorabilia from the fixture themselves. They lost boots, they lost shorts, they lost shirts. Everybody lost something. I think Jimmy Nicholl was one of the last men in to the dressing room, and all he had on was his slips. That was it. The rest had gone. Thereafter, the celebration down the road, Jimmy Nicholl said to me, "Any tunes in the car, Tom?" And I did. I gave him a cassette tape I had in the car at that time, which got a sing-song going apparently on the bus coming down the road. I'll not say what the tunes were.
You're on friends, don't worry.
Absolutely. Well, it was a tape from the Black Skull Flute Band, to be honest. Incidentally, I never got it back from Jimmy Nicholl from that day at Pittodrie. So, excuse me, that set the tone for the boys' bus journey down the road. And then, of course, Durante gave me the sensational story, which is in the book. If you don't mind indulge me, I'll give you that wee bit story because it was quite mind-blowing. Durant McCoist, titled In Two Coats of Paint, haven't they, of course? So they're on the bus celebrating all the way back down from Pittodrie. They've gathered as much as they can by way of a carry-out from Pittodrie, from the players' lounge and director's box and our room and whatever. They've stopped at Stonehaven, topped up with a few beers, and no doubt Graham Souness would be living up to his name as Champagne Charlie with the bubbles at the front of the bus. They then stopped off again at Ochterarda and picked up some more lubrication to head back to Ibrox. And Souness was sitting at the front of the bus, and he summoned Durante to come down to speak to him. So McCoy, being McCoy, said to Durante, "Oh, you must be getting a new deal. Might be down. Come back, let me know how it goes." So Durante goes down, sits next to Souness, and Souness, in his own inimitable style, said, "You've had a great season, Ian. Terrific season. We've won the league. That's what we set out to do from day one when I come through these doors. You've been a big part of it. However, I'm withholding your league-winning bonus until you prove to me you can live your life with more responsibility." To which Durante replied, "It's $8,000, Gaffer. I need it. I've spent it." And he said, "Well, you're not getting it until you prove to me that you can live the life and the expectation off the field the way a Ranger should. Now go back up there and send your mucker down, but don't tell him. I just said to you." So Durant goes back to his seat, says to McCoist, "You're on." He says, "Is it an image package? Are we getting image rights? Are we getting a few quid?" He says, "I have to say nothing. You have to go and see him yourself." So McCoist trots down to the front of the bus and takes his seat that had been vacated by Durant to sit next to Souness. And Souness says, "I'm going to tell you the same as I told your mucker. I'm withholding your league-winning bonus until you show maturity. In fact, I'm withholding your league-winning bonus until you get married. I've had enough of it." McCoy said, "Until I get married?" He said, "It's $8,000. Souness says, "It doesn't matter. I need you to be more mature. I ain't paying your league-winning bonus, despite us winning the league, until you get married." McCoy, quick as a flash, retorted, "Stick your bonus where the sun doesn't shine." Spun off the seat and went back to his own seat. That wasn't quite the words he used, but
I can imagine.
They both got their bonus before the end of the summer, incidentally, for the record. But that was Souness's way of saying, "Yeah, we've won the league. There's more to come, but you need to sharpen your act. If we're going to improve off the field, you guys need to live your life in a different fashion." They did get their bonus, as I say, but that was Souness. That was gone. That chapter was over and out. The league was won. It was on to the next challenge.
First time I've heard that story. It's an incredible one.
When Jackie told me, I said, "I can't print that." He goes, "Of course you can." I said, "Ian, are you sure I can print that?" And he went, "Of course you can." So it's there.
Wow. I wonder if he was in a bad mood because he got sent off that day.
He probably was. I mean, he says himself, when he gets sent off day one in Edinburgh at Easter Road for the challenge in George McCluskey, he was mortally embarrassed because his father was in the stand that day, and he felt he'd let himself down, let his family down, let Rangers down. And maybe he looks back in that and takes inspiration from it, that he was overcommitted. His adrenaline was out of control, and perhaps thereafter he found a mechanism to actually be less exuberant on occasion. The great story there, of course, too, is that as he's been sent off and dispatched for the early bath, as he trots past the dugout, he says, "Job done, Watty," to Walter Smith, to which Walter Smith replied, "That's not who I told you. The target was Kirkwood. Billy Kirkwood was the enforcer in the Hibernian side that day, and it was George McCluskey." Not quite a case of mistaken identity, probably close enough. They've got the wrath of Souness. And then, funnily enough, later, Billy Kirkwood came to Rangers as a coach. And I always remember taking in a game for Rangers TV at the time, a Youth Cup semi-final at Tannadice, where Billy Kirkwood was also a bit of a hero. Rangers won in extra time, and when they scored the goal in extra time, they celebrated way in the corner, including the goalkeeper, young Gallagher was the goalkeeper at the time, travelling all the way from his own goal to the other end of the pitch. They celebrate with the outfield players, and after the game, while standing outside the Rangers dressing room, Billy Kirkwood let them know that's not the Rangers way. He said the game hadn't been won at that stage. I thought, wow, So Billy Kirkwood, a terrific football man, but Graham Souness, an absolute one-off.
So I'll move on from the first season. I could talk about the first season all day, but the second season, 87-88, third in the league, knocked out the Scottish Cup again early on. It's really a bit of a come down, a bit of a disappointment compared to the highs of that
I
first
think
season.
you were always going to get a reaction.
Yeah. Obviously, we had a great run in Europe, but why it felt like a great opportunity missed that season, because we felt we had the best squad in the country and it didn't quite translate onto the partner. But why do you think
maybe didn't quite knit together as quickly as we would all have expected? Celtic's centenary year, they were on a mission in that particular event. It still hurts me the way they won the Scottish Cup, though. The throw-in, which probably should have been our throw-in, taken way on the far side opposite the main stand at Hampden. The signings were coming thick and fast. Perhaps we didn't have the continuity required to be league champions again. Aberdeen had had a bit of a lift. Of course, Fergie had moved on to Manchester United. Ian Porterfield, I think, was in charge at that time. And he very quickly put a decent side together. And of course, everyone wanted a piece of Rangers because, what we had achieved, these big players. And, I had a cousin who played for Dundee at the time, a Rangers fan. And I can honestly give you 100% categorical assurance. He raised his game against Rangers. He raised his game against Celtic because he was a Rangers man, but he raised his game at every opportunity against Rangers because he was a Rangers fan. And I think people saw the opportunity. If you go and deliver against Rangers, you might just catch the imagination of Souness and his backroom team and find yourself with an opportunity to join the club you support. So everyone wanted a piece of Rangers that particular second season. We didn't react the way we possibly could have. Back to the, live your life better, as the message was given to the youngsters in the squad. And that was maybe a wake-up call at that time. So it certainly made it interesting. And even today, here we are in 2026, it's arguably the most competitive league since that second season under Souness, where you couldn't determine a winner too early. So yes, Souness, no one felt it more than Souness, and he was given fair. I'm not going to say chastised, but he was told that wasn't acceptable by David Holmes, who, while taking instruction from Lawrence Marlborough, David Holmes had built a business, not just a football club, a business that was built on winning, and not winning played havoc with your cash observations and cash flow commitments. It also meant perhaps having to throttle back a wee bit on the transfer market as well, but not much. But it just wasn't in the game plan to be second ever in Souness's tenure.
Yeah, I actually think a lot of people don't realise we finished third that season, which is quite incredible that the one season he didn't win the league, he didn't even finish second. But what I was going to say, that although we didn't win the league that year, during the course of the season, he brought in to the club a lot of players who were going to become really important in years to come. He brought in Richard Gough during the season, he brought in Ian Ferguson during the season, John Brown during the season, Mark Walters during the season, Ray Wilkins during the season. So by the time that season finished, although it was unsuccessful, he had actually assembled what I would probably argue was the strongest team that we had in
future-proof. Yeah. Richard Gough was always a target from day one for Graham Souness, but it was just the intransigence of Dundee United under Jim McLean. He just refused to sell his prime asset to Rangers. So history again repeats itself. You think back to Gregor Stevens coming to Rangers from Leicester. Rangers wanted him from Motherwell. Motherwell wouldn't sell him direct to Rangers. He went to Leicester and then came back to Rangers thereafter. Not in any shape or form am I, suggesting that that Gregor Stevens was the quality of Richard Gough. He wasn't, but Gregor was a Rangers man. Richard Gough was a Rangers man. That's where he wanted to be. His father had been a Rangers fan, albeit he played with Charlton himself. But the fee we paid ultimately for Richard Gough was manageable. Yeah, it was eye-watering. But the plan was, if you got 10 seasons out of Richard Gough, if you amortised the fee over 10 years, It was a bargain. And that proved to be the case. Skipper for 9 in a row came back to answer an SAS much later after playing south of the border. So, Richard Gough was a visionary signing. Mark Walters was one of these players, perhaps prematurely. Graham Souness was looking to find a replacement for Davie Cooper. And Mark Walters, I think, has been the player who'd been identified as that. And you can confirm just how highly he was regarded by Graham Souness that he took him to Liverpool with him later. But he had the ability to provide for others and score a few goals himself. So, it was a transition period as well. And yes, Graham Souness was like a kid let loose in a sweet shop when it came to the transfer market on occasion, but very few failed. And he had a wonderful working relationship with David Holmes and the board thereafter, and they were more than happy to fund it. But the only payoff was win. They had to win trophies, and that then was self-perpetuating as they needed money. A good run in Europe, again, would provide funds. And you didn't have the crazy windows nowadays, like January to make a rush decision, or the close season, when most clubs are held to ransom in these transfer windows. If you needed supplement your squad in season and you had the funds to do it, get on with it.
So as I said, they brought on all those players in 88 and 87, 88. 88, 89 started off with that 5-1 win over Celtic, which I still occasionally watch it on YouTube because it brings back so many great memories to me. The day Ray Wilkins scored that thunderbolt. Is there an argument 88, 89 was the season we played the best football under Graham Souness?
I think so. There was an eyebrow or two raised. You mentioned the man there, Ray Wilkins, who was a veteran of derbies in London and Manchester, in Italy. Private jet from David Murray picking him up at Paris when he was playing with PSG, brought him to Ibrox, dropped him straight into the side. People thinking, is his best days behind him? No, they had the legs all round about him, and they just give him the ball and things happened. I think at that time Rangers were a dream to watch. You had Ian Ferguson in from St Mirren, playing in a wider midfield role on occasion. A wonderful striker of the ball, a goal threat as well. Another of the handful less that won every 9 in a row medal. So he'd come in £1 million or just short of, who had been on his way to Manchester United to sign. He didn't want to be there. He instructed his driver that day, take me back. He fell out with the board at St Mirren because he wanted to be a Ranger. And competition for places in that midfield was absolutely red hot at the time. But it was wonderful days. That 5-1 will live forever in the memory. A super sunny day at Ibrox gave them a goal of a start, even if you recall, and then come back to win 5-1.
Yeah, and they scored some great goals that day. Everybody talks about the Ray Wilkins one. I still love the Kevin Drinkle header. I love that goal with Mark Walker cross. Yeah, fantastic. He was a really good player as well, actually. Someone that came in, done a great job for a season, then was away again, just the way you talked about.
Absolutely. He came in and let everyone knew he was there. He never gave a defender a moment's peace, and he had an eye for a goal as well. Interestingly, a lot of the players, when you speak to them about that day, the 5-1 win, wanted more. They wanted to go on and score 7, 8, potentially 9, and were frustrated that Souness was having his own wee showboat on occasion inside the centre circle. A bit of keepy uppy, keep the ball, keep short, sharp passing without penetration. He was just happy to almost embarrass Celtic, not by the scoreline, but by the way that Rangers controlled and conducted the tempo of the game. Wonderful memories.
So that season, we went on to win the League Cup for the 3rd year in a row. Souness had a great record in the League Cup. He won it 4 times and got to the final in the 5th one.
So much so we almost made the retitled it the McCoist Cup.
But for some reason he had a terrible record in the Scottish Cup. Do you think that would be something that would annoy him even now that he never won a Scottish Cup.
Absolutely. I recall going out to Hamilton on a bus. I was on a bus coming back from Andorra skiing about 5 stones ago, to be honest, David, probably. And the news filtered through that we'd been knocked out of the cup by Hamilton Accies 1-0.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, no, something's wrong here. Somebody's got this wrong. As we journeyed back from the Pyrenees on a coach. I think that would probably be the $1 million question to Graham Souness. Why was the Scottish Cup such a challenge? I think the only win came against Avery 1-0 or something too.
He didn't win it at all.
No, the only I meant McCoist. His only Scottish for all the years he was at Rangers.
Right,
his only Scottish Cup winners medal was against Avery. So yeah, it's a conundrum. That one, I wish I had the answer. And if I bump into Graham Souness anytime soon, I'll ask him. That's for sure. You've evoked a wonderful question there, David, to be honest. But the league was bread and butter. He always said at the start of every season, our first and singular target for the moment is to win the league and qualify for what was the European Cup or the Champions League as it became later. That was the primary target. And, perhaps he underestimated some opponents in Scottish Cup matches. Perhaps he rotated the squad when a bit more continuity might have got better results. But as you say, yeah, it's a real conundrum. But the league was always his focus, and they very rarely failed to deliver, did they?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to give you a really difficult question. So thinking over that 1986 to 1991 when Graham Souness was in charge, he brought in so many great players. There was so many players, international class players.
Yeah.
Some of them at the very peak of their powers at the time as well. If there was one signing you thought was the one that had the best impact, the biggest impact on a Rangers jersey, which one would it be?
I think I would have to go back to Terry Butcher. It was a game changer. It was a message throughout, British football. Rangers are signing the best in the business, including the captain of England. So while there were some terrific signings, and we've touched on so many that just bring a smile to your face, rolling back the years and thinking about what they achieved in the colours of Rangers, Terry Butcher would be hard to beat there, I suspect, simply because, as I say, he was captain of England at the time. And if you look back to some of his body language in game, he made sure his teammates and those that were, under his captaincy got the job done. He let them know what was expected. So I certainly think it'd be hard not to position Terry Butcher as number one. But there are so many others along the way that look back over the years and will remember some wonderful times at Ibrox. Terry Hurlock from Millwall. No one knew anything about him. Came to Ibrox in the middle of a barber strike, perhaps, with that flock of hair that he had. My goodness, he knew what winning was about. Short term at Rangers, but got the job done along the way as well. Quickly became a fan's favourite. Ray Wilkins, who had seen it all, done it all in a stellar footballing career, was still taken aback when he came down the tunnel at Ibrox to a full house capacity crowd. The expectation and the way the fans got behind the team and the way the team gelled and bonded and delivered on the part and played some scintillating football along the way. But someone else you mentioned earlier that he inherited, that was Mr. Consistency, with no ego, no big time Billy about him whatsoever. And Graham Souness tried to replace him by 5-6 different left backs along the way, including the big boy from Denmark, Bartram. Stuart Monroe just did it week in, week out with wonderful consistency. Gary Stevens at right back, an athlete, a modern day footballer before right backs were footballers, who travelled up and down, and really his powers of recovery and acceleration, if you lost possession, was breathtaking. So, you could pretty much fill a book about the signings along the way. In fact, it's always a good read, always handy, absolutely sensational. Wonderful days, wonderful names, wonderful Rangers.
Yeah. So
I read that this afternoon.
Yeah. Obviously, you didn't even. Well, you did mention Maurice Johnson briefly, I suppose, but that's a day that. Do you think Souness himself that's a signing he's particularly proud of?
I think so. It broke the mould in so many ways. Even today, Bill McMurdo, who was Maurice Johnson's agent at the time, says there is never a day goes by that he's not asked about it by somebody, even non-football people, asking about signing Maurice Johnson. But the work had been done behind the scenes. It wasn't a knee-jerk reaction to Celtic looking to re-sign Maurice Johnson. It was an international match. It might even be against Norway or France. Memory escapes me just for the moment at Hampden, and Bill McMurdo was sitting 6 or 7 seats along from Graham Souness and Walter Smith at Hampden. Maurice Johnson had an outstanding shift for Scotland that night, and as they were exiting the stadium, Graham Souness captured Bill McMurdo and said, "Would Mo come to Rangers?" Apart from being shocked by the question, like all good agents, if there's a few quid to be made, Bill McMurdo replied in a positive fashion, "Yes, of course he would." And Graham Souness said, "I see," and remember, he was a teammate of Maurice Johnson at international level. He said, "I see such a different Maurice Johnson from his time in France. He's a different player, a different character." And Souness himself knew by playing in the continent, his lifestyle had to change. And he was a bit of a party animal in his time at Liverpool. Maurice Johnson, we all know the exploits that he would enjoy of a Saturday night, perhaps in Glasgow. But having been in France, he valued, the way that he had to adjust to be the best he possibly could be on the pitch. So Graham Souness recognised this, and as soon as he got that indication from Bill McMurdo that Maurice Johnson would sign, and remember, Graham Souness had tried to sign a couple of high-profile players.
I remember Ray Houghton.
Yeah, John Collins was another who he wanted at Ibrox, both of whom didn't quite fancy it for their own reasons. But Maurice Johnson, as soon as it was proposed, he wanted a piece of that particular action. That goes a long way to confirm, I suspect, David, the power, the lure, the attraction of working with Graham Souness as well. So it was another of the JFK moments when he was unveiled as a Rangers player.
Absolutely.
They were burning season tickets and things in Edmondson Drive from memory. Pretty quickly thereafter, I think that was forgotten about when they saw the way he got about his business. And Maurice Johnson will forever be in the history as a terrific Rangers player. And as I say, away from the football element of it, it was a totally new chapter for Scottish football that Maurice Johnson came to Rangers.
Yeah, I'm going to very quickly touch on another striker that he brought in. The signing of Mark Hateley, who ended up being an absolute giant for Rangers.
Yeah.
But after he signed, there was a little period of time, just towards the end of Souness' time as manager, actually, when the fans' hero was put on the bench. And I think it's quite nice to see that you've got a chapter by McCoist in the book, because obviously at the time there was a little bit of an idea amongst the fans that McCoist and Souness maybe didn't quite hit it off. So it's good to see that Ali doesn't bear any grudges over that little period of Rangers history.
Yeah, I think he reflects on it now, David, saying, the manager was right to take the course of action that he did. But again, it confirms the embarrassment of riches we had at the top of the pitch by way of selection. And Mark Hateley, again, had been a longer-term transfer target for Graham Souness, but he had a niggling ankle injury that just wouldn't go away. And the suggestion was he may not have passed the medical when insurances and things get involved. But when that started to be confirmed as being behind him and he came to Rangers, he struggled. I remember his debut in a pre-season match against Manchester United, and the Rangers fans can be a bit fickle and expectation high. They were pretty quick to let Mark Hateley know that they expected better from this experienced frontman with that long flowing hair and that big stride and a wonderful first touch with the left foot. But as soon as he became fully match fit and we saw the real Mark Hateley, wow, in full flight, Scottish defences couldn't handle him, David. Couldn't handle him. And even after Graham had gone, it was Mark Hateley who got that first title, 6 for Walter Smith's team against Aberdeen at Ibrox, when Aberdeen needed only a point to win the league. Well. Graham had gone only a matter of weeks before, and Mark Hateley took it on himself effectively to deliver that league title. And it was probably his greatest 90 minutes in his Rangers career. And it shows you how much that affinity was built with the football club, that Mark Hateley is still at Ibrox in an ambassadorial role. Rangers just gets under your skin, as you know, David, and there's so many former players. Didn't matter their birthright, didn't matter where they came from, but today they are still absolutely bleed Rangers at every opportunity. Interesting wee story just on that one, if I take an aside about that 6th title. David Robertson played his last game for Aberdeen at Ibrox that day, but he had met, maybe I shouldn't have said that, his agents had met Graham Souness and Walter Smith with a view to signing in the summer, in season. So with hindsight, that could have been seen as perhaps tapping up, but his agent it was.
We actually had Davie on one of our podcasts talking about his Rangers career, and he told us that, and it was the first time I'd ever heard that story, and I had no idea about it.
He'd tell you about going to training on the minibus with the Aberdeen players, when the news came through on the radio that Graham Souness had left Rangers for Liverpool, and Alec McLeish and all were celebrating, banging the roof of the minibus about Graham Souness leaving Rangers, and they saw that as a real pathway to them being league champions. Walter Smith, Archie Knoxett, all had other ideas, and none more so than perhaps Mark Hateley. So, I mean, the characters from these days are absolutely wonderful. And you saw what it meant to them all, be it Mark Hateley or David Robertson, who 6 seasons at Rangers won a league title, and every season post Souness. But sensational.
Yeah. So I'll close off with just a couple of questions about Souness's legacy, if you like. So, well, first of all, when he left to go to Liverpool, as you say, just a few weeks before the season was due to finish, the timing wasn't great. But how much of that do you think was down to the fact that it was Liverpool, and how much of it do you think was down to the fact that he didn't have the best relationship with the Scottish football authorities by that time? He'd been in a few run-ins with them, and do you think he had just run his course at Rangers and he would have went somewhere else anyway, or do you think it was only because it was Liverpool?
I think Liverpool was a huge part of it, David, to replace Kenny Dalglish. Yes, there were other side issues that perhaps influenced it. He obviously looked at it and thought, I might not get the chance again. Liverpool were flying up until obviously the Heysel disaster and things, but to replace his good friend Kenny Dalglish, he maybe thought if someone else comes in, gets that gig and does well, that chance to go there may never happen again. At Rangers, he'd been picked up for being standing in the tunnel, the first ever Old Firm live television match by Scottish Television, when he was suspended from the playing area effectively. Cameras picked him up standing in the tunnel. That was enough for the SFA to charge him, and that was a great frustration. He had not one but 2 fallouts with Aggie, the tea lady at St John's, who had a moan at him for leaving the dressing room in a condition that she wasn't comfortable with, and again he reacted, which was probably a sign of frustration on his part, when he knows with hindsight he shouldn't have done so. I think there was an amalgam of a lot of parts to it. Meanwhile, probably thinking he was maybe just getting too big for Scottish football from a management perspective. He loved to play. His last game as a player, Rangers played Dunfermline. The players wouldn't give him the ball when they come off the bench. So he probably realised then, my boots are well and truly hung up, apart from the training ground. Let me focus on management. And the piece of the jigsaw that was probably the most interesting to him was the fact that he fitted nicely to dovetail his former club at Liverpool, weighing up all the other secondary issues I think that influenced, but the biggest draw was to go to Liverpool, a club that he'd enjoyed so much success at.
Yeah, I get that.
David Murray said it's the biggest mistake of your life. And nowadays, all these years on, Graham Souness himself says it was the biggest mistake of his life.
Yeah, I read about the regrets he has. So I suppose the book is called The Significance of Souness. So the obvious question to finish, Tom, so which is, where does Graham Souness sit? When you talk about 153 years of Rangers history, how significant is he in the great pantheon of players, managers, figures in Rangers Football Club?
Huge. He's got to be in the top three along the way. Maybe that's a wee bit generous when you think back to the Bill Struth, Scott Simon. From a personal favourite, he'd certainly be top three. The first book I ever did, David, was Jim Baxter, Simply the Best. And he was my first footballing hero. I then tried to do a wee bit of justice to Sandy Jardine as another terrific Ranger in the book called Sandy, the Authorised Biography. Then my third effort was Barcelona, because after Jim Baxter, my next Rangers hero was Colin Steen. And to get to know the boys in that Rangers side that delivered in Barcelona 72 is a privilege and something I'll never take for granted. So if you put me on the spot, Jim Baxter would be my personal first Rangers hero. But in the whole scheme of things, of who made Rangers what Rangers are, I think arguably Bill Struth, number one, who set standards which are expected even to today. And you would not position Graham Souness any further than third in that particular pantheon, perhaps even second.
Wow. So, I'll give you a very quick story before we stop.
Please.
You talked about the day we won the league up at Pittodrie in 1987. And the way back in the bus that day, I told my dad that I was going to name any son that I ever had after Graham Souness. So my son's called Graham. Graham. And he was born only 3 months before Souness then went to Liverpool. Because I keep telling him, if he'd been born a few years later, he might have been called Walter. This book, we can get it at Bookshop, Waterstones, that kind of place, as well as online at Amazon,
And it will be out in paperback version next month. So
Excellent.
For the moment, it's only hardback in the marketplace, but paperback version will be out later this month, I believe. Yeah.
Excellent, superb, Tom. It's been an absolute. I could have talked for another hour, but I'm well aware of the fact you're a busy man, and I so appreciate the fact you've taken your time to come on Four Lads with us.
We've tried to make it work for a number of months previous, but it's been terrific to get the opportunity and have a chat. David, as I say, evokes so many memories, and you can't help but smile at some of these particularly fantastic events in the glorious history of Rangers Football Club.
Yeah, and I'm sincerely hoping that the next glorious event in the history of Rangers Football Club is listening to you describe the final whistle when title 56 comes back at last. That would be heaven. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, fingers crossed.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's hope so. Let's hope so. That might even eclipse that day in 1987. You never know. So, Tom, thanks very much again. Thanks very much to everyone who's watched. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Book Club. If anyone get out there wants a good book to read in the summer, the story of Graham Souness is certainly right up there in my list. Tom, thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
To everyone, I look forward to the next episode of Book Club on Four Lads. Bye for now.
Thank you.
The Four Lads podcast is sponsored by Rhino Express, Clydeview Joinery, Athol Industrial Solutions Limited, and CSD Air Conditioning, in partnership with Black Rooster and Art of Gold. Thank you for listening to or watching the podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show.